You're not afraid of the dark, are you?
My God, it's full of stars.
Quite an experience to live in fear, isn't it?
You have to consider the possibility that God does not like you. He never wanted you. In all probability, he hates you. It's not the worst thing that can happen.
It isn't.
There is a greater darkness than the one we fight. It is the darkness of the soul that has lost its way. The war we fight is not against powers and principalities. It is against chaos and despair. Greater than the death of flesh is the death of hope. The death of dreams. Against this peril we can never surrender. The future is all around us, waiting in moments of transition to be born in moments of revelation. No one knows the shape of that future or where it will take us. We know only that it is always born in pain.
Happy heresies, my beloved true seekers. Welcome so much to Aon Bite, formerly Coffee, Cigarettes, and Gnosis, formerly broadcast at freethoughtmedia.com, but eternally manifesting itself for you from the virtual Alexandria through the GodAboveGod.com. Welcome so much to the only authentic radio program this side of the pleroma on Gnosticism and its brethren in the esoterica. We shy away from scholarly pontification and definitely stay away from New Age babble. Welcome so much on this approximately July 19th, the year of our demiurge 2008, for another round of spiritual enemas and literalism interrupt us. Welcome so much to A Dream of You.
Too weird to live, and too rare to die.
I am Abraxas, the God above God, and your psychopalm through the seas of fate and between the gnashing rocks of orthodoxy, all the way to the farthest shore. And you, my beloved true seekers, are the Gnostics, the veterans of 1,000 psychic wars and the knowers of the unknown. Yet each one of us is a hero indeed, though, having survived being thrown into this world we did not make, naked, wet, and screaming, enduring another lifetime of rules we never truly understood and fated scenarios we never cared for, fighting our way through institutions that sucked away at our individuality until all that we had left were glimpses of a time before time when we were part of the divine imagination.
It's a huge shit sandwich and we're all gonna have to take a bite.
But the Gnostics are not just heroes, but also eternal champions of the truth and the boundless mysteries of the sublime dominions. We are the ones who hear the rattling noise while we drive down the highways of life, beyond the static radio noise of the material world. We are the ones who see past the heavens and catch the full silhouette of the rusty machine prison that is the universe, who have chosen the path of ascent even if it costs us everything we ever held dear.
Man only has one lifetime, but history can remember you forever.
And we have made a conscious choice to no longer fear illusions, which is what most of reality is comprised of. Let go of the wheel of time and space, and free fall with Tom Petty into freedom by simply becoming, as the Gospel of Thomas says, passerbyers of existence. That's why you're here at Aon Bite. That's why you know we don't take prisoners but liberate them with show after show that offers a myriad paths to spiritual release until you can find one that suits you.
Free your mind.
And without a doubt, one of the most majestic of these avenues to the transcendental is the Kabbalah, also recognized as Jewish Gnosticism, or, as one scholar called it, the revenge of myth, because it radically interprets the Torah in an ultra-allegorical and metaphorical manner. Like the Talmudic sage Rabbi Yehuda once said about the Torah, one who translates a verse literally is a liar, one who adds to it is a blasphemer.
Never underestimate the power of the Schwartz.
The Kabbalah is not a religion or denomination, but an epic escapade of starry self-knowledge and ecstatic rapture with the ultimate experience of being godlike while we are still in the flesh. And that sounds very much like Gnosticism, doesn't it? Needless to say, as I've said it before, both Gnosticism and the Kabbalah sprouted from the same esoteric labia long before Christianity. After all, both deal with a system of divine emanations that pour forth from a supernal supernova, and both speak of a cosmic cataclysm. Both relate to the saga of the redemption of a fallen female divine principle and the monkey shines of a deficient creator god. Both inform that in each human there is a slumbering godly fragment in need of restoration to its astral home. And both stress the importance of self-knowledge and knowledge of the deific, which paradoxically are one and the same. Or should I just call it gnosis?
I feel like I was meant for something more than this. I want to do something with my life. I want to be somebody.
And there are many more similarities we'll get to. And after the show, please visit our player at thegodabovegod.com or download several shows dealing with the mystic Judaism and its relationship to Gnosticism if a light bulb still hasn't gone on, which probably means you might need to slide the cheese back on your cracker again.
My God, not everything's about you and your little job and your little world.
Today, or more like in this eternal now, we not only plumb through the Kabbalah, but a flavor of Kabbalah called Neo Sabbatian Kabbalah. With us is Yakov Leib HaKoHain, author of Kabbalah and the Interpretation of Dreams, For the Sake of God, An Answer to Jung, and To Die for the People, a Jewish interpretation of the Crucifixion. Yakov is also a writer of various magazine articles, a prominent lecturer on several occult traditions, and a true spiritual disciple of all the great Kabbalah sages of past and future.
Underestimated from day one. You'd never think I was a master of the universe now, would you?
For more information on Yakov and where to find a treasury of articles and web lectures, please visit his website, donmeh/west.cam. That is Don, DonMeh/west.cam. Your mind will be deliciously fornicated by essays on Jewish and Hindu metaphysics, Jungian philosophy, Gnosticism, and even Islam. What Yakov brought to the interview is but a crumb of wisdom he has gathered without a doubt through many lifetimes and many experiences of that spiritual event horizon we call Gnosis. You won't be disappointed, my beloved truth seekers.
I don't want any baloney, magic tricks, or psychological mumbo-jumbo.
And Yakov will also deal with a very essential personality of the way of the mystic, who has been basically overlooked for over 200 years. This giant of giants is Sabbatai Zevi, arguably the most popular messiah who has walked the earth, a man who shook the foundations of the Jewish, Islamic, and even Christian world. Don't forget his name, and hopefully be aware of his revival in modern times. As controversial as Sabbatai Zevi still is, he is also a source of great teachings in all things arcane. And like all the Gnostic Sages, Orthodoxy has spent a great deal of energy truncating his legacy as it always does. One could say that the victors write history, but I say only losers rewrite history. Such insecurity, don't you think? But that's the way it's been.
You see, none of it was real. It was illusion. Your art, your science, it was all a nightmare. Now it's done. Finished.
But enough of my drivel. Before Madonna and Tell Me More hear about this show, Yakov, and what the real Kabbalah should be, and send in a New Age militia to shut us down. Let us climb the stream of life, the Sephiroth, to the gates of imagination that the Zohar speaks about with our interview with Yakov. This is the Aon Bite interview. Today we have the pleasure of having, and I hope I pronounce this right, Reb Yakov Leib HaKoHain. With us today, close enough to discuss Neo Sabbatian Kabbalah. How are you doing today, Reb Yakov?
Very well, thank you. How are you?
Very good. Thank you very much for joining the show.
My pleasure.
Why don't we begin, before we go into what you are all about, why don't we begin from the beginning? Could you give us a brief history of Sabbatai Zevi, who is arguably the greatest messiah since Simon Bar Kokhba?
Well, I would agree with you entirely that he was. There's no question. In the late 1700s, there was a man, Sabbatai Zevi, who was very peculiar and was looked upon by everyone around him as being very intelligent and very mystical, but very odd and very strange. He went through what would be called in Hebrew ma'asim zarim, mystical strange actions. And when he would come out of them, he was very remorseful about them because he did strange things when he was in them, such as marrying the Torah scroll under a canopy with rabbis present. And so he was looking to relieve himself of that. He was not looking to be the Messiah. And there was another man that he heard of, Nathan of Gaza, who was considered to be a great prophet at the time. And Nathan of Gaza was a very profound follower of Isaac Luria. And he was practicing all of the Lurianic Kavanah and was very deeply into that form of Jewish mysticism, which is designed to bring about the coming of the Messiah. He also, this Nathan, would read the roots of a person's soul and give them tikkunim, repairs for their soul. In other words, he was very much like a psychotherapist at the time. You wouldn't think of him that way, but he was doing that essentially and was very well known for it. Sabbatai Zevi heard of him and came to him to be cured. And he walked in the door, and the minute Nathan saw him, he realized that that man that he saw in front of him was the man that came to him in this very profound vision that he had had that lasted for hours and hours, in which the Messiah was presented to him, and it was Sabbatai Zevi, whom he had not met. This is recorded both by Nathan's own hand, and then historians later have picked it up and written it down. Everything I'm going to tell you, incidentally, is pretty historically true. So this came as a disappointment to Sabbatai Zevi, because he had really hoped to be relieved of this. And it took 2 weeks, approximately, as I recall, for Nathan to convince Sabbatai Zevi that he was indeed the Messiah, that he was the mystical Messiah, and that what was happening in these mystical strange actions when he'd be seized is that it was the soul of the Messiah pouring out of him. And Nathan, understood what it was doing and saying. And so gradually, Sabbatai Zevi came to believe he was the Messiah, and with that belief, all hell broke loose, as it were. And from one end of the Jewish world to the other, this man was literally accepted as the Jewish Messiah. It's the only time that has ever happened, before or since. Before, there had been small, localized messianic figures. You mentioned one at the beginning. Jesus is another, but you have to remember Jesus was in the Galilee, and he had 12 disciples. It wasn't until long after his death that thousands and thousands came and converted to his religion. But Sabbatai Zevi, in his lifetime, when Nathan announced that this man was the Messiah, thousands, millions all over the world accepted him. And there was almost an hysteria that swept through the Jewish world and much of the Christian. It's just incredibly dramatic to read about. And he was accepted as the Messiah. Now, the thing that differentiated him from all the Messiahs is the full extension of the Lurianic Kabbalah, which, if taken to its extreme, which Nathan did, comes to a point of oral Torah, of Talmudic Torah, that is based in the Hebrew phrase mitzvah haba ba'avera, that is the fulfilling of a Torah commandment by violating. And this is the antinomian aspects of the Sabbatianism. the fulfilling of a Torah commandment by violating it. It's very complicated. I don't know if we have the time for me to go into the details of that, but it's based on the premise that there are two Torahs that were revealed on Sinai. The first Torah was a totally spiritual Torah, and that was, quote, in the Old Testament, written by the finger of God. That's the one that Moses threw down and broke when he found the Israelites in the sin of the golden calf. He goes back up and he receives a second Torah, and that's called the Torah de Berea, the Torah of remaking, and that's the so-called Old Testament now. And the first one, the totally spiritual Torah, is trapped within the laws and commandments of the second Torah. Am I being clear?
Yes, very clear.
Oh, okay, so they're trapped. So ultimately, the hidden teaching was, all right, in order to fulfill the intention of the command against masturbation, for example, you must masturbate. But when you do it, you must do it for the purpose of releasing the holiness in it, not for the sake of the act itself. That became very fundamental and defining in Sabbatianism. Ultimately, at the beginning, Sabbatai Zevi took the cheleb, the forbidden fat from the kidney of the lamb, and he blessed it with the blessing that he made up, and he ate that forbidden fat. And the blessing he gave was Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam matir isurim. Blessed art thou, Lord our God, King of the universe, who makes the forbidden things permissible. And at that moment, what took place was that several things were fulfilled, the mitzvah hababa avera, but also the prophecy of a second Torah, the reinstatement of the totally spiritual Torah when the Messiah came. And there's a great deal of oral Torah that says when the Messiah comes, it's going to be a whole new Torah. All the old laws will be abrogated, and that's what he did. And rather than being negative commandments, they became positive commandments. And this applied primarily to the sexual prohibitions, because you don't see the sexual prohibitions mentioned until the second giving of the Torah. And this antinomianism largely defined the Sabbatianism of that day. And ultimately, and this is where it gets very tricky, the Sultan of Turkey learned about this Sabbatai Zevi. And there is a lot of gossip and a lot of hearsay about what I'm going to say, but the historical facts of it are given finally by scholars, mostly Gershom Scholem in his great book, Sabbatai Zevi, the Mystical Messiah. The Sultan sent for Sabbatai Zevi, and this happened several times. Each time, the person that he sent to get him would come back and say, no, you don't want to do this. He is too holy. Honestly.
Wow.
Just read Gershom Scholem. Mm-hmm. These are things that are not talked about in standard Jewish discourse about Sabbatai Zevi, but they're right there. It's historically recorded. Finally, what was agreed upon was that Sabbatai Zevi's brother and the Sultan's representative would discuss all this and set up a plan, and they did. And then the Sultan sent for Sabbatai Zevi, and then Sabbatai Zevi went to the Sultan with great pomp and circumstance, wearing a green scarf around his waist, which meant he knew damn well why he was going there. He was going there to convert. And in fact, when he got there, that is what he was asked to do, to convert to Islam. Now, the reason for that is because it's one of the ma'asim zarim that the Messiah must do. The Messiah must enter into the realm of evil in order to liberate the holiness that is in it. And so he converted to Islam for that reason, because he never, ever followed it after the conversion. He never followed Islam. And the punishment for that should have been his death, but the Sultan never executed him, knowing full well. In any case, he converted. Now, this is where the problem emerged, because the Jewish people of the time could understand an antinomian Messiah, who said to eat chaleb, who even advocated certain kinds of forbidden sexual practices, and in public did them himself. But they could not understand the Messiah who converted to Islam. Am I being still clear?
Yes, very clear. Yeah, because usually what I've read is that he had no idea and he came and he was forced.
Just read
he was forced
Gershom.
To convert.
Right. No. Read Gershom Shalom. And again, not just because Gershom Shalom gives this positive picture, because it's not positive. It's objective. You know, Gershom Shalom was the great historian in Israel, and the book that I'm talking about is 1,000 pages long and published by Princeton University Press. You know, it is definitive. So in any case, he goes and he does convert. He does. There's no question about that. The question is, what were his motives for converting? A lot of folktale and myth grew up around the conversion because the people were very angry at him, primarily in Turkey. Europe, they understood apparently a lot better. But in any case, they did not understand why he did that. And so a lot of antagonism, needless to say, sprung up against him among the Jewish people and persists to this day. In another book, Messianic Idea in Judaism, Shalom also talks about how these preconceptions have got to be done away with if we're to truly understand what happened during that great episode, in fact, not in later fiction. So he puts on the turban. There are two ways to convert, the way I did, which is to make shahada, where you literally say in front of Muslim men at the masjid, there is no God but God, and Muhammad is his prophet. You recite that. That is the highest form of conversion. The other way was to put on a Muslim turban after taking off the Jewish turban and throwing it down on the ground. That second way is the way he converted, which isn't perhaps as profound a conversion as the Shahada. After that conversion, he never practiced Islam. He studied the Quran, which he loved, but he never practiced Islam and continued to be the Messiah for those Jews who continued to follow him. The Sultan knew of this. And first of all, the Sultan did not execute him. Islamic law requires that if someone converts to Islam and then reverts away from it, they must be executed. And even Sabbatai Zevi's brother wrote in a letter, the true miracle is that the Sultan has never executed him. As a matter of fact, the Sultan gave him a title, and this to me is enormously significant. The Sultan of Turkey gave to Sabbatai Zevi the title of Kapıcı Başı, which in Turkish means keeper of the gate. Now that was an honorary title that was common in the Sultan's household, but that Kapıcı Başı, that phrase, that term, among the Bektashi Sufi and many other Muslims, means the Mahdi, the Muslim equivalent of the Messiah. And so it would appear that what the Sultan was doing was acknowledging that this man was Kapıcı Başı. And even though that man did not practice Islam, he was, in a way, still honored. He was at least not executed. At that point, about 300 families followed him into holy apostasy. They also converted to Islam. He never asked anyone to do that, one or two. He never even asked his greatest prophet, Nathan of Gaza, to convert. The 300 families who converted did so on their own accord. They were not asked by him to do it. Their descendants are the 15 to 50,000 hereditary ma'aminim, or believers, that exist in Turkey right now. There are followers of Sabbatai Zevi still in Turkey. And they are outwardly Muslims, but secretly Jews and secretly followers of a kind of Sabbatian Judaism. And that's where I've come in. There is what's being called this Neo Sabbatian revival that I've been kind of more or less spearheading for the last 40 years. And that brings us to our teachings, which are the same and yet very different. If you read the Maharid interview, you can see that our teachings are the same. They're antinomian, but in a way very different.
And Yakov, before we go on, isn't part of your teachings, like Sabbatai and then later Jacob Frank, to enter, like you say, the Maw of
yes.
the Maw of Evil, which means to convert to each religion?
Well, in part, that's
to
not the only
Christian?
way.
No?
But I did. I personally studied and literally converted to, well, I was born a Jew, of course, but I literally studied and converted to Hinduism, and then Roman Catholicism, and then finally, the most difficult for me, Islam. I studied Jung at the Jung Institute, and I studied Jung with one of his closest disciples, who at the time was 82 or 83. But I'm not a Jungian analyst. I'm a Jungian theologian, if you will.
And so what are some of the main doctrines of Neo-Sabbatianism? I think the most controversial one, or at least it's not so controversial for somebody who's a Talmudic Jew, but the notion that God does not redeem us, but we are here to redeem God, or more like the face of God?
Yes. That's a complex issue, and it's written about and spoken about in Sabbatian works, and also in the early works of the Baal Shem Tov, and very much so in the works of Rabbi Nachman of Breslov. So it's not just exclusively Sabbatian. The point here is that God has fallen into duality by the act of creation. That prior to creation, God was perfect and whole, and was, in a scientific way, if you use the language of science, a homeostatic system. It was in total equilibrium. By the act of creation, the Zohar and Kabbalistic works tell us, and reason tells us, by the act of creation, God had to become imperfect. He had to go from being infinite to being finite, from being unembodied to being embodied, from being unlimited to being limited in the world. And that's what you see in the 10 Sephiros. The 10 Sephiros are increasingly limited aspects of God, until by the time they get down to Malkut, the world, it's totally in darkness. So the point is now that God suffers in that state of duality, because any system that has been in a state of unity and that falls into disunity automatically seeks to return to the unity from which it has fallen. That's true in physics. And it's also true of God. God was this system that created man and the universe, and by the creation fell into disunity and is in a state of dissonance because of it. And man is created to return God to the unity from which God has fallen. And by doing that, man will be redeemed. Buber makes the point that this is how the kind of thing we teach differs from Christianity, for example. Christianity teaches that the ultimate goal is the redemption of one's personal soul. But this form of Judaism does not. It says, yes, we must perfect ourselves and liberate ourselves and all of that. But for what? We must begin with ourselves, Buber says, and not end with ourselves. The ultimate purpose is to reunite God in everything we do. And by reuniting God, God's suffering will cease. And when God's suffering ceases, our suffering will cease.
Yes, and that's basically part of the concept of the tikkun.
Yes.
The redemption, or the gathering of the sparks.
Yes,
right.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're going to ask me, let me say before you ask, how does one do this? How does one reunite God with itself? The answer is that in Mahayana Kabbalah and what followed from it, there was the great Shavirat HaKilim, the shattering of the vessels. The initial creation of the 10 Sephiros did not stand for a whole lot of reasons that have to do with good and evil and so forth, but they shattered. And in their shattering, shards of light flew off in all directions, and it was out of those sparks, those nitzatzot, those holy sparks, that everything in the universe was created. Now, it's amazing. If you put this side by side with modern physics, it's exactly what modern physics says. It only took modern physics 400 or 500 years to catch up with Isaac Luria. Even in modern physics and quantum mechanics physics, it talks about the participator, and that is, each of us is literally recreating the universe, literally, through what the Zohar calls the gateway of imagination. So the question, how do I participate in the reunification of God? Well, first of all, everything contains within it sparks of holiness. Now, this isn't the Shapoan idea that everything is God. We're not talking about that. We're saying that everything literally has within it the nitzotzot, the holy sparks, yearning to return to their source. But they cannot do it on their own, so we must do it. So what does that mean? It means I was just drinking a cup of coffee, for example. Every sip of coffee I take, I literally imagine the holy sparks within that coffee, and I literally return them to God, to their source. In the gateway of imagination, as the Zohar calls it, which the Zohar says is the only place we can know God. If you're sharpening a pencil, you literally imagine that as you're sharpening that pencil, the sparks of God that are in that pencil are being released and raised back up to God. If you're eating a piece of food, with every bite you take and you taste the flavor, you imagine that flavor are the holy sparks of redemption that you're raising back up to God. So that life becomes a continual act of sacrament in the most ordinary things that one does. In the most ordinary things. You're picking up the dog dew from the backyard, as I do. I have dogs. I'm literally imagining the holy sparks of God that is in that dog shit, and I'm raising it up to God. Because it's in everything. In everything. Now the question is that really happening? And the answer is, who the hell knows? I don't know. I think I know. I know because I'm told by tradition that it's so, and I'm told by modern science now that that is so. That there is nothing I can imagine that does not either exist at some level of the universe, or by my imagining it, does not come into existence. So the answer is, very probably it does work. Very probably we are doing that. But at the very least, what we're doing is making everything in life a sacrament. And that is what produces what we call the sacramental life. Everything we do is a sacrament. And it isn't holy in the sense of being remote from the world. It's holy in the sense of being very much involved in it.
Yeah, Yakov, if that's so, then why do we need, or how does the concept of the Messiah or the mystical Messiah play into all of this?
That's a very good question. It is greatly misunderstood. There are two ways of understanding the Messiah, that the Messiah is literally an historical figure at some period in time that is going to take place. That is not the way we look upon the Messiah, either not in Jesus, not in Sabbatai Zevi, not in any of them. We look upon the whole concept of the Messiah in the way Jung did. Before Jung was a psychiatrist or psychologist, Jung was a theologian and a mystic. And Jung wrote this marvelous book called Answer to Job. And he says, and I'm quoting him, the indwelling of the Holy Ghost, the third divine person in man, brings about a Christification of many. Many. And so this Messiah is not some outer historical event, but an inner revelation that has come to pass in people like Jesus and like Buddha and like Sabbatai Zevi, and what it expressed through them becomes instructive to us for how we are to do it in ourselves. So the Messiah comes in each of us, not later on sometime in the future.
So the Messiah is an ongoing process.
It is a work in process. The Messiah is a work in process. And the final messianic kingdom, as it were, is when the whole world, or at the very least a critical mass, achieve that level of consciousness within themselves.
So that would be, and so the ultimate experience is that enlightenment, and only
Yes.
a few really get it, right?
Yes, yes.
And I'm assuming in Neo-Sabbatianism you believe in the doctrine of reincarnation.
Oh, absolutely. And so do Hasidic Jews. The Baal Shem Tov says, the holy sparks that fell when God built and destroyed the worlds, man must raise from stone to plant, from plant to animal, from animal to speaking being. But it isn't the person who's being reincarnated. This is where us Westerners don't understand reincarnation from any point of view, let alone from the Hindu point of view. It's the soul returning, not the personality that was around the soul. That's gone. It isn't that Joe Hingamababas, the local butcher, gets reincarnated in the next lifetime as somebody else. It's the soul that was in that shell gets reincarnated in another shell.
And in Neo-Sabbatianism, how do you explain the concept of evil?
I don't know that I could explain the concept of evil, except to say that what we call evil, malevolence, and all of that, comes from God. It is God. It isn't something off there on the other side with a red underwear and horns and a pitchfork and a beard. God is both very evil and very good. God is in this state of duality. Remember at the beginning I said God has fallen into duality by the act of creation, and that duality is very much seen in this crazy God who is vicious and evil one minute and loving and forgiving the next in the Old Testament. And that's just observable. Jung talks about this in great detail in Answer to Job, and I'm only giving a very superficial treatment to it. But still, God is that. The same God that creates good also creates evil. And we see that in the Bible. God says, I, the Lord, create good and create evil. I, God, alone, no other does all this. So evil is that which we experience as a result of which side of the bed God woke up on that morning. For example, let me give you an example. If you look at Exodus, God calls Moses, and he says to Moses, you're my guy, you're my dude. Go out and save my children, Israel. And Moses agrees to do it. That night, Moses camps down, and God, who only a few hours before sent him, enters his tent and tries to murder him. That's right in Exodus. The same God who sends him to save the children of Israel comes into his tent that night to murder him. And he's saved by his wife, but that's a whole other story. This same God is the God that says to Moses, now when you go to Pharaoh, you must say to Pharaoh, let my children go. But I, God, will not allow him to let the children go. And then I, God, will punish him for not allowing them to leave.
Yeah, he hardened the Pharaoh's heart.
Well, yes, but the same. But the point isn't that he hardened his heart. It's that he's also the God who says let them go. Why does he do that? Because at one moment he's one way or it. I don't like calling God a he or a she. God is an it. God is not a person. God is not a form. God is not a being. God is the most we can know, an inner state of inborn consciousness that we all are born with. We don't acquire it. We don't learn it. We don't create it. It's in us. It's what Jung calls the imago Dei, the image of God. That's all I can know of God. But I know that God. I know that God exists. Whether there's a God out there, a supernatural being sitting on a throne or hanging from a cross or whatever, I don't know that. I don't know that. And there's no way to know that. And besides, I think looking for that cheapens God. So the God that we're involved in is this inner God that's right there that I can know. And whether or not that inner God is a reflection of some outer supernatural God, that's a question of theory and belief. So this inner God is in this state of chaos that I spoke of, both good and evil.
Yakov, yeah, you've definitely, this sounds very much like Jungian, definitely like Jungian theology of individuation.
Oh, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's right out of 7 Sermons of the Dead.
Yes, yeah, isn't that, do you know, he was very embarrassed by 7 Sermons of the Dead. He didn't want it published, and it isn't that he didn't like what was in it, he didn't like the language of it. He thought it was too pompous.
Yeah, it was wonderful.
Oh, beautiful. Come on. Have you read Answer to Job?
No, just...
Oh, you must.
Don't you call it the third dispensation?
I don't call it that. The old-time Jungians, who I was trained by, call it that. Edinger and Kirsch and all of those people, they call it literally the third dispensation. James would say to me, and he'd have a copy of the Old and New Testament, you know, he would say, this, and he told the copy of Answer to Job, this, he said, is the third dispensation. There is the Old Testament, the New Testament, and Answer to Job, and it should be bound as one book, and he would put them all together. And these are the old Jungians, the ones who were close to Jung, part of his inner circle. That is not the case anymore, I don't believe. It's a great book, let me tell you. It is a remarkable, remarkable book.
And Yakov, you speak also a lot about undergoing the Job experience and how Jung went through it, and Ramakrishna, which we'll get to soon, went to it. What exactly is the Job experience, and should it be a caveat for those pursuing a higher state of consciousness?
I think, yes, it's a good question. I think we have to be very aware that if you ask God continually, make me a vessel for your incarnation, you know, because many people do that, you better know that just like with Job, God is going to say, ultimately, if he hears that, it's going to say, all right, but if you're asking to be a container for my power, for me, I'm going to have to make sure that you're capable of holding me. And metaphorically speaking, he takes a huge stick and he beats the hell out of us to make sure we don't crack. And those who do crack, who are most of the ones, wind up on the street, preaching to the lampposts and screaming at passing cars. And those who do pass the test survive, like Job. Like Job. I mean, the whole point of Job is that what you see is this argument between the two sides of God at the very beginning. God is arguing with himself about man. On the one side, there is the side of God that's very positive and says, have you seen my servant Job? There's no one higher, there's no one better. And Satan, which only means the adversary, which is the other side of the mind of God, says, yes, but I warned you, if you hadn't given him everything you've given him, he wouldn't love you. I'm sure you've had arguments like that in your own mind about
very
people
true.
and things.
Mm-hmm.
And what Job is, and what Jung is saying in Answer to Job that Job is that kind of argument in the mind of God at the beginning. And so God then decides, all right, I'll take everything away from him for no reason. And everything is taken away, everything. And at no moment does Job curse God for that. At no moment does he question God for that. And the 3 Edomites who come and sit around him all say to him, no, you see, you did something wrong. God is punishing you because you did something wrong. And he says, no, I don't think so. I think that's just the nature of God, sometimes to punish and sometimes to reward. And right now I'm going through a stage where God is punishing me. And that's the nature of God. I don't think it has anything to do with me. And at the very end, Job finally says, and this is where the Job experience comes in, he finally says to God, after all this suffering, horrible things, he says, I am the man who obscured your designs with my empty-headed words. I knew you before only by hearsay, but now, having seen you with my own eyes, I take back everything I have said, and in dust and ashes I repent. And then it tells us at the end of Job that Yahweh turns to the Gentiles, the Edomites, who had been telling Job that it's his fault, that he obviously sinned and so forth. God turns to them and says, I burn with anger against you Gentiles for not speaking truthfully about me the way my servant Job has done. Therefore go and bring him animals, and he will sacrifice them on your behalf, and I will listen to Job on your behalf and forgive you. The Job experience is coming into that kind of horrible wrestling match with God. And it happens to us. Most people, however, when it happens, we think of it just as ordinary human suffering. And indeed it is, if that's all we think of it as. But it isn't just ordinary human suffering. It is that aspect of God that's throwing all this crap at us, and there's nothing we can do to stop it. And the Job experience is literally understanding that, as Job did, while it's taking place. Not afterward, but while it's taking place. Just as Jacob wrestled literally with God, the dark side of God, incidentally. The oral Torah tells us that was Samael, the dark side of God. And because he wrestled with God, was raised to the status of Yisrael, a prince of God, but was injured by it, so too Job is raised to the status, not necessarily of a prince of God, but certainly a priest of God, both of them for having struggled against the attacks of the dark side of God. It happened to Jung. Jung went through 5 horrible years, which non-Jungians made a point of claiming, and still do, that were nothing more than psychosis. But clearly it was not psychosis, and he gives the results of all that he went through in answer to Job. And when one goes through the Job experience, that is what one goes through. You're asking God, make me a vessel. God says, okay, I hear you, but I'm going to test you first. And your children die, and your house turns down against you. Your friends all leave you. You lose your money. All of it, just like Job. And what most people do is freeze up, and they start praying to God, don't let this happen to me, please. What have I done? What have I done? No, that isn't what you do. That isn't what you do. You do as Job did, and as Jung did, and the whole time it's happening, the whole time you're wrestling with God, you're talking to God, and you don't leave God. You don't let go of God just because God is punching you. And out of that comes the reward that was given to Job and the reward that was given to Jacob. But when it's not encountered that way, when we're begging God to, oh, please stop this, oh God, I can't take this, why are you doing this to me? How can a good God allow such terrible things to happen? All that happens is that you suffer. And it doesn't usually go away. There are residuals of it.
And Yakov, moving on a little bit, how did the Hindu sage Sri Ramakrishna influence you and Neo-Sabbatian Kabbalah in general?
Oh, very profoundly. Very profoundly. You have to understand that everything I teach, I have experienced. I haven't just read it. I've spent a great deal of time with teachers studying it and being brought to the experience of it by those teachers who also studied it and were brought to the experience of it. And so what I saw in Ramakrishna was what I see in Jung also. Ramakrishna practiced all religions. He literally did. Very much in the same way, although from a Hindu perspective, as Sabbatai Zevi and Jacob Frank did. I studied with a great Hindu master in the Vedanta order of Ramakrishna for years, and the experiences that led me to have had a profound experience, have had a profound effect on me. In that now I know I'm an ignorant ass. Before, I didn't want to believe it. Now I know it, and I accept it. I mean, because that's really the experience that one achieves in that kind of pursuit of, quote, enlightenment, unquote. What you come into the experience of is that there is really nothing. And everything else that we think is something is just bullshit. And you come out of it the same asshole you were when you went into it, except now you know you are, and you don't care.
Oh, well, that sounds that sounds liberating.
Well, that's why it's called liberation. It's called moksha. It is liberating. I'm telling you, it's enormously liberating. Yes, of course, I still care what people think of me. I mean, I would be a liar if I said I didn't. I'm in the body. So long as somebody is in the body, You're never free of the ego entirely. But I used to care. I can't tell you how I used to care. I don't give a damn. I really don't care what people think or say. And what I do and say, I do not do and say to gain their approval. And I was liberated from that by the experience of Ramakrishna. And it's the same nothingness that one goes into as the Ein Sof of Kabbalah. The Brahman of Hinduism, that absolute nothingness has an absolute parallel in the concept of Ein Sof in Kabbalah. And it is both of them, and all of them, the Tao, the Buddha, all of them, they are ways of attempting to describe this state of unitary, undifferentiated consciousness that preceded creation and still exists. And that is absolutely the highest form of God. And the experience of Ramakrishna is to go into that. And to some extent, the result of the Job experience is to go into that as well, but it's fiercer.
And Yakov, what similarities do you see between the Neo Sabbatian Kabbalah and Gnosticism?
Oh, I see enormous correspondences. First of all, I've been teaching a class on the Nag Hammadi library now for about 7 or 8 years, every Saturday morning on the internet, and particularly the Gospel of Thomas, but also the Thunder Perfect Mind. I know you must know Thunder Perfect Mind.
Yes, I do.
All right, in Thunder Perfect Mind, remember, it says, I am the this and the that. I am the whore and the holy one. I am the father and the mother. I am the wife and the husband. And it talks about this duality in God, because that's what the Gnostics were talking about, that God is in this state, in the world of duality, that this crazy God that the Jews and the Christians, well, they weren't Christians at the time, but, well, yes, they were, worship is this crazy God that comes out of a state of wholeness and is striving to return to it. In the Gospel of Thomas, over and over again, that's what Jesus says. They ask him, how shall we come to the kingdom of God, at the very beginning of it? You remember this, and I'm quoting from memory, but it's such a beautiful answer he gives. He says, when you make the inside like the outside and the above like the below, and the male like the female, so there is no longer male and no longer female, then you will enter the kingdom of God. Well, that's exactly what we're talking about in Neo Sabbatian Kabbalah. When God is united back into itself, when the fallen aspect of God, which is called the Shekhinah, the female, is reunited with the male aspect of God, then that is the kingdom of God. And so it's very Gnostic in that sense. In fact, it's my belief that Kabbalah is not an extension of Gnosticism, but Gnosticism is an example of an early bridge between Jewish esoteric thinking and post-Jewish Christian thinking.
Yes, in your lectures you talk about how Gnosticism is pre-Christian. They probably came from the same fountainhead.
I think it came from exactly the same fountainhead, exactly. In fact, the remarkable thing that most of the scholars don't seem to want to pay any attention to is there is this oral Torah in Judaism that has existed among the Jews for the last 4,000 years. It is the Torah that it is believed was given to Moses at the same time as the written Torah and explains the mysteries of it. It was never written down until about the 3rd century, and then it started to get written down. But it existed as oral wisdom prior to being written down. Now, the Zohar, for example, is an example of that. The 5 volumes of the Zohar did not exist at the time of Jesus, but the wisdom that is in the 5 volumes of the Zohar did exist at the time of Jesus and before him. And one of the most remarkable things that you can see is that in the Zohar there is a description of the conception, the mixed paternity of Cain and Abel. For example, if you look at Genesis, it says, these are the generations of Adam. When Adam was 130 years old, he had one son in his likeness and his image, and he called him Seth. Period. End of sentence. No mention of Cain and Abel. Exactly the same thing is found in the descendants of Jesus. In Luke, it gives the descendants of Jesus, and it goes right from Adam to Seth to Jesus, totally leaving out Cain and Abel. Why? Because if you look back in Genesis, God says to the woman, "What have you done?" And she says to him, in the Hebrew of the Old Testament, "The serpent seduced me and I ate." And the word in Hebrew that is used for seduced means literally to have sexual intercourse. And in the Zohar, it says, for 2 men had intercourse with Eve. Nachash, the serpent, who walked on 2 legs like an ordinary man, and Adam. And from that mixture came forth Cain and Abel. It was not until 130 years later, when Seth was born, that there was no stain of Nachash. Now, the important thing about that is you see exactly that in several of the Nag Hammadi Library Gospels. On the origins of the world, you see it, where the fallen angels come down and as Nachash have sexual intercourse with Eve, and from that are born Cain and Abel. So you clearly see the oral Torah of Judaism in the Gnostic Gospels. Now, I'm not suggesting those things actually happened, but they're mythology, and as myths, they have a power of their own.
Yeah, that makes, that's very good. And in fact, in one of your lectures that I've heard, you also talk about the Gospel of Philip, talking about how light and darkness are brothers of each other. And,
yes, exactly. So. I mean, my God, you know Elaine Padros, of course, and one of the things she said in her marvelous book on the Gospel of Thomas is that what you see in the Christianity reflected in the Gospel of Thomas is very different than the Christianity you see now. What you see now is a Christianity based on sin and redemption. But when you look at the Gospel of Thomas and the other Gnostic Gospels, you see a religion of illusion and enlightenment. Jesus constantly says, "I came and found you all drunk," in the Gnostic Gospels. You're all, he says, bewildered. You're asleep, and I'm here to waken you up. And when they call him God, he says, "Why do you call me God? I am not God, because you are drinking from the bubbling spring that is coming out of my mouth. You are confused, and you think that I, the man, am God. I am not God." That point is made over and over again, and religion in the form of Christianity repaganizes itself from that depaganized position. It gets repaganized that Jesus is a man God. Anyone who has known practicing, believing Christians know it's very much a part of their belief that that man was a God. Well, that isn't what we learn in the Gnostic Gospels. And not only not in the Gnostic Gospels, in the Gospel of John, the 4th Gospel, Jesus says, and again I'm quoting from memory, "It is not I who say and do these things, but the Father dwelling in me." I mean, it's very clear. I am not God. The birdcage is not the bird. The wine bottle is not the wine. Jesus was not the Christ. There was a Christ, indeed. And it's the same Christ that came pouring out of Sabbatai Zevi and Ramakrishna and Buddha and all of them. And that can come out of all of us in what Jung talks about in this Christification of many. But the man Jesus was not that God. When the man Jesus died on the cross, that man died. He says, "Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani?" "Father, Father, why have you left me?" And you probably know the little Gnostic Gospel. I think it's called the Laughing Jesus or the Dancing Jesus. And he's up with his disciples in a cave looking down on Golgotha. And he's pointing and he's saying, look, do you see? They think that's me.
Yeah.
That was the teaching of Jesus. In Sabbatian Kabbalah, Jesus occupies an important place. One of the things that we've revived is the very essential teaching from Sabbatai Zevi that he taught in the synagogues. the Messiah will restore the soul of Jesus to holiness. Now, by that, he did not mean that Jesus is going to be made the Messiah of the Jews again, or a God. What he's saying is very complex and has to do with mitzvah haba ba'avera, which we started talking about. And that is that what the Messiah has to do, according to esoteric Jewish teaching, is literally enter into the realm of evil to liberate the sparks of holiness that are in there. The problem is that when most who enter into that realm of evil go in there, they become trapped by it and do not come out. This is what is believed in very Jewish tradition, very secret Jewish tradition, happened to Jesus. He was literally practicing the left-hand side of Jewish practice. And we see that. He raises the dead. Well, come on. Now, in retrospect, that's because he's, quote, God, unquote. But then it was because he was a necromancer. All of these evil spirits fall down on their knees in front of him. Now it's, because he was God. No, it's because he was their master. And the fact of the matter is, now this may come as a big surprise to most of your listeners. This part is not a surprise. I'm sure most of your listeners know that there is absolutely no historical reference to Jesus and the events in the New Testament other than the New Testament. There are none.
Right.
The one mentioned in Josephus has long ago been discredited as a later addition out of embarrassment on the part of the Gentiles. There's one exception to that. It's the most amazing exception. In the Talmud, in the Secta Sanhedrin, there is a description of the trial of Jesus by the Sanhedrin. And it goes into great detail. And it says, yes, Jesus was tried and found guilty by the Sanhedrin and sentenced to death by the Sanhedrin, but not for the sin that the New Testament says. The New Testament says that the Jews, the dumb kikes, killed him because he said he was God and the Messiah, and that was against the law. It was not against the law. There was no law then, and there is no law now in Jewish law that prohibits anyone from claiming to be God or the Messiah, let alone a law that would be punishable by death. So that was not why he was sentenced to death. He was found guilty of being a necromancer in the Talmud. And that you see evidence for in the New Testament. And that's what he was executed for, because that is against the law. And that is only because he entered into the left-hand side in order to liberate it, but he was trapped there. And that's, if you talk to some very profound Hasidic Jews, they'll tell you the same thing. They'll say Jesus could have been a great tzaddik, but he went over to the Sitra Achra. He went over to the other side, and he's trapped there. Now, I don't think Christians are going to like that much, and Jews don't like that. Well, and Jews don't like that much because it acknowledges that there was something going on back then, and there was. It isn't what the Christians say was going on, but there was something that happened then.
Yakov, I think that's all the time we have today, so I'd like to thank you very much for coming on the show.
You're welcome. It's been a pleasure.
And taking your time, and good luck with your teachings. They're very stimulating.
Thank you. Thank you. Good luck to you, too.
Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Every man carries a circle of hell around his head like a halo. Every man has to go through hell to reach his paradise.
And there you have it, my beloved truth seekers. Yakov Leib HaKoHain, author of The Kabbalah and Interpretation of Dreams, For the Sake of God, an Answer to Jung, and To Die for the People, a Jewish interpretation of the Crucifixion. Again, for a titanic bonanza and information on his syncretic movement, please visit his website, donmeh/west.cam. That is spelled DONMEH/west.cam. I've already downloaded several of his lectures, and I must say that they are a real horror show. Nothing like a wild voyage into all religions until you see there's similar lights in each one and you could create your own tapestry of self-liberation. Heresy just shouldn't be this much fun, I tell you.
May God stand between you and harm in all the empty places where you must walk.
And like Yakov mentioned, it's so true that the more enlightened you get, the more the pleroma strokes your suffering soul in a lovely manner, and the more your holy heritage awakens, the harder your life will be. Jehovah and his angelic mafia will attempt to distract, hinder, and even hurt you when you are on the path of ascent.
If I don't finish my meditation, I tend to get a little cranky.
The darkness does not want to release the light, for it needs it to survive in a sick, cosmic, codependent manner. The cosmic ego and your own ego want as many slaves as they can have for worship and adulation. I am a jealous God, and there is no God but me, said our old man on the mountain once upon a time, and the road up there to bring him back his wisdom or Shekinah is not an easy one.
Jesus, why does God hate me?
Huh? He doesn't hate you. He hates me. He's going to let me be crucified again.
He hates me more. He doesn't answer my prayers. I prayed to him every day and he never answered me.
Don't expect this spiritual materialism of the West, where because you become awakened, your bank account will swell and pretty people will surround you telling you how cool you are. Expect the opposite. After all, as Gnostics and mystics, we are all allogenes, Greek for strangers, and Gnosis only helps to remind this fact we sorta already knew all along.
I know who I am.
So keep on smoking tobacco and drinking that caffeine, for the Gnostics were the original cafe culture of the Greco-Roman era. Keep on lighting the fires of awareness and keeping them warm for those seeking what we have found, and keep on ducking when the universe throws everything in the toilet seat at you. We never promise you a rose garden here at the virtual Alexandria, only a one-way ticket to your own crucifixion and resurrection while you are still alive. And perhaps, or in between, keep writing your own gospel and living your own myth. Like William Blake wrote, a man must create a system or be ruled by another man's system. The same goes with our divine nature. It's as simple as that. I am, and I am Abraxas, broadcasting at the virtual Alexandria through the GodAboveGod.cam. The road is ended, the song is over. Thought I'd have something more to say. But don't cultivate any troubles, my beloved true seekers, because like heaven,